I am on mute. There we go. Morning, everyone, in a louder voice. Yes, as Matt says, we're marching through Ezra. We had a week off last week to join our friends at Christchurch Quinton and celebrate harvest together. And here we are back in Ezra. I really feel like I'm busking this morning. This is not my comfort zone. Much as I'm an extrovert and I love being with people, I love talking, not from this position. So when my name pops up on the preaching rota, I have to be well prepared, really, really well prepared, and run it through with Matt and check it over again. And I'm letting you into a secret here. I have to print it out in really big font so that I don't lose my place. I daren't have it on a tablet because I'm going to touch something and it'll all disappear. I have to be really well prepared because I'm not in my comfort zone. And I did that. It was all ready for Thursday. And then God nudged me. And I thought, oh, all that preparation wasn't right. It wasn't right. It wasn't what God wanted to say to us, the gathered church, this morning. And then, amazingly, I was so relieved. I was sitting in the car park in Asda and Matt gave me a call. So we had a chat, and then I thought, now I'm convinced I've prepared the wrong stuff. So I had a little bit of a rewrite. So I am busking this morning. I've got some words. I'm not sharing what I planned. I'm sharing from my heart because God gave me a big nudge and was present with me even in the car park in Asda. So Ezra is a book all about restoration. When Judah was at their lowest point in exile in Babylon, 400 miles away from home, with Jerusalem completely destroyed, God graciously stepped in and restored his people. And we've been looking over the past weeks how this happened in unexpected ways and how they faced all kinds of obstacles. And you know, as I've read Ezra more in the last weeks than I've ever done, I've realised that this isn't just an ancient story. It isn't just a story about what God did years ago. It was written to encourage God's people that he still watches over us. He restores his people, even when things seem hopeless. So today, we're in chapters 7 and 8 of Ezra, and guess what? It's the first time that we actually meet Ezra, the very person that the book is named after. And by the time we meet him in Ezra 7, verse 1, 80 years have passed since the beginning of the book. And we meet Ezra by a way of genealogy in verses 1 to 5. And it establishes that Ezra is from a priestly line. In fact, he's a descendant of the high priest before the Babylonian captivity. And Ezra faced the most humongous reconstruction project. The great city of Jerusalem had laid in ruins for decades and decades. No one had attempted to rebuild it. The task was simply too big. The stones were overturned, the gates were burned, and everything of value had long since been taken by the scavengers or eaten by the rats. I added that. That's not in the story. Jerusalem was ruined, and no one had the energy to rebuild it. But when Ezra comes on the scene, all of that changed. You know, we've been doing a test, haven't we, recently? We've all been doing that little test to see what we are. So I thought I'd have a look at Ezra. I reckon Ezra was a teacher and a prophet, and his friend Nehemiah was an apostle. One knew the law, and the other one knew people. Ezra was committed to preaching. The other was committed to action. And together, these two men, were used by God to rebuild the city, the temple, and the walls of Jerusalem. And inspired by these guys, other leaders rise from the ashes. Men like Zerubbabel. I love that name. I've mentioned it to Rachel, but it was a no. Men like Zerubbabel, they came to be household names in Israel because they'd followed in the courageous steps of Ezra and Nehemiah. And then the Bible goes on to tell us of the heroic actions of all the others, Jeshua, Sariah, Rela, Mordecai, and it goes on and on and on. And every one of the new heroes Jerusalem came to know did their work in the hardest times they had ever known. And this is me trying to close my eyes and think of the picture. They must have been desperately short of food, security, sleep. They had to move stones weighing 2 tons at their lightest. And they built gates that would withstand the attacks of huge, huge armies. They worked with a sword in one hand and a brick trowel in the other. They worked in an environment that was overwhelmingly negative, with each day's news reports explaining that they couldn't do exactly what they were doing. And in the heart of the difficult times, they survived. They succeeded. And in the worst of the bad days, they were victorious. When the people insisted that they couldn't make it, they did more than simply survive. They actually thrived. So how does all this relate to us here today in Brandhall 2023? We only have to turn on the TV or our phones, and the news reports tell us that we're in hard times now. A tank of petrol feels like a major purchase, doesn't it? I think it's about £66 in my car to fill it right up. Everything from food prices to basic supplies have seen dramatic increases that have given rise to the cost of living crisis. And hard times apply to other areas of our life too. Relationships can hit hard times. Grief can leave us in emotional ruins. And illnesses, both physical and emotional, they take their toll. So many people are hurting. In every place and space that I find myself, in every community and every church, people are hurting. You know, we call this building a church. Are you going to church? Will you be at church? I'm coming to church. But you know, the Bible never uses the word in that way. The word church literally means the assembled ones, or the ones gathered together. The original Greek word was ecclesia. It doesn't refer to the building, but to the people. In other words, the church is not a building, it's a community. A community brought together by the one thing that we all hold in common, a relationship with God through Jesus. And whilst God may not be calling us to physically rebuild the walls of this building, although sometimes I would like to take a sledgehammer to bits of it, and Matt has often mentioned knocking down a few walls, God is calling us to build back better, to rebuild an authentic sense of community after the pandemic. Some of us will be hurting today. I've got stuff going on in my life that hurts. Tough times are difficult. If your health is starting to disappear, weeping is okay. If your mother, your father, your brother or your sister get sick and they require constant care, that's tough. If they die, it's unbelievably tough. And if you're part of our Alpha group on Wednesday, we weep with Wendy, our new friend, as she's lost her daughter, Sammy. It's tough. We weep with Julia at the loss of her brother, Jude. That said, it's important to recognise around the world that people are suffering in the most dreadful circumstances, aren't they? We've woken up this morning to news of a further earthquake in Afghanistan. The fighting in Israel, the Ukraine and other war-torn countries. You know, our problems can feel insignificant compared to those. But the problems we are still facing, they matter. God cares about us, he loves us, and so he cares about what's hurting us. Nothing in the passage of Ezra came free of pain. They'd returned from captivity in a trip that would take today about 4 hours. That's even with a security check at the airport. And these guys, they needed 4 months. Can you believe that? They walked, they carried their supplies, and they made slow time. And those who chose to leave were also leaving a fairly comfortable environment. They'd made their new homes, and they were heading towards a very tough one. They willingly headed straight into the tough times. And here's where it gets important. As they went back to Jerusalem, they were making a real faith statement. They were trusting God to take care of them. They were accepting God's challenge to do something great. And they were confident that they were in the heart of God's will as they took action. To paraphrase all of that, they were leaning in on God. And for the first few years, things seemed to go well. The altar of the temple was rebuilt and the sacrifices were offered in accordance to God's word. Things got even better. The foundation of the temples were laid and rebuilding was in full swing. As the foundations are laid, there were moments of immense joy and sadness. The people who had never seen the old temple are shouting for joy because the foundations are laid. It's a moment to celebrate. The elders who had seen the old temple were weeping in sadness. The new foundations were a poor replacement of the glory of the old temple. The elders recognise that what is being built now will never reach the glory of the old temple. Perhaps another important lesson for us to learn. Grieving over what is lost and cannot be replaced is healthy. But taken too far, there can be a dangerous nostalgia to the past. You know, the past has a nostalgia that the future never has. I don't think I'd ever thought about that. We're nostalgic only ever about the past. And we can so easily forget how tough those times were too. Did the Israelites give up on rebuilding because they couldn't replicate Solomon's temple? That was the old temple that was destroyed. Or did they build the best that they could with the resources that they had? For us here now, many of us, I believe, are grieving the loss of old things. I'm grieving the loss of the old KCC. Some of you will remember it as Brandwell Baptist Church. Dave and I have been here 23 years. We came with our 4 children because we were looking for a church that was larger than life, that we could belong to with our larger than life family. Some of you have been here much, much longer than I have. And if you were here on Wednesday night, you will have heard John Button. And he talked so longingly about the old hut. Do any of you remember the old hut? It used to be on the land the other side of this building, and it's been replaced now by the Oak Tree Centre. He talked about it with such love and remembrance, not just the hut, but the many, many children who used to gather in there in groups on a Sunday or during the week. I'm sure there's lots of other things that you remember. I remember pre-pandemic, Promised Land, we had 25 children most Sundays. We had a youth club that was bursting at the seams on Friday nights. Time out, I think it was on a Thursday, but there used to be 20 or 30 of our senior members. They'd gather for food and fellowship. And then there's the family and friends who've left. They've moved away for a whole variety of good reasons. I really miss my friends that have moved away. I miss Ben and Bex, Mandy and Jason. A whole generation of children that were a huge part of my life. The kids that I babysat for and took away on weekends away. There was never a week that I didn't see most of the children. Sometimes it feels like our church And by that I mean the gathered people and not the building. The gathered people united by Jesus has been destroyed, torn down beyond recognition or repair. And it's painful. It's really painful. And over these last months, I've been navigating whether I want to stay here or whether I need to go somewhere different. The loss I've encountered at times has been unbearable. Those of you know me that know that I'm an extrovert off the scale. I need to be with lots of people. I need to be in groups where I can talk a lot and make plans and be part of the outworking of those plans. I've been accountable to Matt. Don't worry, this isn't coming as a nasty shock to him. I've been accountable with him and poured out my heart on numerous occasions, and eventually have been able to come to a decision. And it was at this point in my well-prepared sermon that I was about to go on into the we can do this type of approach. Everything is better together. But God has, I think, given me something different, and that we now need to linger and to allow God to speak into our own individual situations. These last years have been a painful journey for many of us, a journey through the valley of the shadow. How do we succeed as a church, the gathered people? What has stopped you, me, from leaning in on God and moving forward? I sense that there's some people that are discounting themselves for building back better because of everything that they're having to deal with. Some of you guys deal with a lot. It may be ill health. It may be caring for others who are ill. It may be other family circumstances. And then there are those of you, like me, that remember the glory days of the past, for who the new things will never compare. And so we cling on to the past. And so Matt's going to come and join me. And together we're going to take some time and to listen to God.
It's good, isn't it, to hear vulnerable and honest reflections. Thank you for sharing so honestly about your own struggles and about your own processing of what it means to be part of the building back better. And as Kath says, we have a sense that maybe there is those of you who might have your own things that you'd like to reflect on and talk and share amongst us. And so as Kath has done, we want to open the floor for you to share some of the things that where you maybe have either discounted yourself because you're handling a lot of stuff, and it'd be good to tell us about that so we can support you and stand with you. Or maybe there's that sense in which, as Kath spoke about, the glory days, that you kind of remembered the good times, and it's hard to kind of embrace the now because you just recognise that you're sad, and you just want to say you're sad. I like Kath, am sad. I have been sad about those who I journeyed with and was doing church with who are no longer here amongst us. That's sadness about that. It's hard to embrace the present, isn't it, of what you're facing, of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to build, when you're like, where are the people I used to do it with, you know? So we're throwing you on the spot a little bit, and this is where we're really trusting in the Lord, and as I said at the beginning, you know, we're a church that shares together vulnerably and honestly. So we're inviting you to take a moment to have a think how you respond to what Kath has shared, and to have a think about whether there's something that you want to share with us about your own struggles, your own processing of what it means to be part of what God wants to do here amongst us to build back better. So take a moment and have a think, have a process, have a chat with God about what you feel comfortable to share. We don't want you to feel like you have to share things that you're not ready to talk to others about. But it would be good to hear from some of you, and we've got plenty of time. We've intentionally shaped this morning around making room to hear from you. So just take a minute or so and have a think about if there's things that you'd like to share so that we can all